Let's bring in my panel now. Shadow Environment Minister, Senator Jonathan Duniam, and Senior Fellow at the Menzies Research Centre, Nick Cater. Let's start, if I can, Senator, with the record spike in small business insolvencies. New data out today revealing almost 7,000 companies have entered administration in the 6 months to September. This is serious.
Peter, it absolutely is, and no one should be surprised. Yet when we asked the Minister for Finance today in the Senate, it was as if it was business as usual. And look, it's a small blip on the radar and people should just carry on. Things will get better, just trust us. When you've got inflexible IR laws, more expensive labour inputs, more expensive energy, we are pricing ourselves out of the market. And the 5.5 million small businesses across the country are the engine room of our economy, particularly in the regions. But nothing this government has done by way of policy is making it any easier. In fact, all of their policies have made it much harder. And as a result, we're having these numbers, but yet they just dismiss it. So we are going to have to keep the foot on the throat of this government to try and get them to see sense here, or else a lot of people are going to lose their homes and businesses as a result.
Broadly speaking, Nick Cater, you've got to have an agenda to run on at an election, particularly when you are in power. You're the government. You've got to demonstrate to Australians that you've done what you said you would do when they elected you, and that you've got then a forward agenda going on. Their legislative agenda is ground to a halt in the Parliament. They lost all of last year on The Voice. We'll be reminded about that when we hit the anniversary on Monday. They've got a very controversial censorship bill for the internet. That's there in the Parliament. The bishop that was allegedly stabbed, Bishop Marmari Emmanuel, he's been out there very publicly critical of what this legislation would do in the instance of his alleged stabbing. I mean, the record they've got, if they've got any sort of record, it's a record of failure.
Well, it's a nothing record, isn't it, Peter? I mean, I suppose they might point to legislating zero 2050 if they think that's an achievement, if they think it's going to win them votes. But that was, the start of their term. I think that was in June 2022. What have they done since then? Not much at all. But I am worried about this misinformation bill because there's a pattern actually in history of, as I've written about in this month's quadrant, of Labor governments in their last few months coming up to an election in their final terms pushing through really bad legislation. I mean, you think about all the legislation, the notorious 19C legislation in the Racial Discrimination Act and so forth. That all came through in the very final days of a government, and it came back to haunt us. I think the misinformation bill will do exactly the same, and it comes out of a government that's just desperate to get something, on its cards, so something on the scoreboard.
Well, I'll show you something else that's come back to haunt them, the ghost of Kevin Rudd. Today in the Parliament, this is a tactic, wasn't flagged. It was all about trying to wrong-foot the opposition, trying to make the opposition look like, it's got a hard job ahead of it to take away from people the NBN. Labor put it on the table that they're going to protect the NBN, that they'll have a legislative mechanism that means it can never be sold down in the future. But some turkey in the PM's office clearly hasn't done their homework, because this is what Kevin Rudd said when he introduced the NBN. Have a listen.
The government will make an initial investment in this company but intends to sell down its interest in the company within 5 years after the network is built.
Well, John O'Daniel, they don't know their Labor history.
No, they don't. And this is what happens when you have 12-year-olds running the PMO and ministers' offices. And I mean, someone sent to me during question time today a copy of a press release from Stephen Conroy saying exactly what the Prime Minister has said. Now, they should know the history here, but what a ridiculous thing to be doing. Out of the blue, urgently we must act to stop the coalition if they ever get their hands back on the levers of power from selling the NBN. As if there was some imminent threat that that's what we were going to do. But what a ridiculous distraction. It is very reminiscent of the whole look over here while they do something dodgy and bad over there, and that's exactly what they're doing. And what's worse is every single user of the NBN across the country will be no better off. They won't have faster internet, more secure internet. It's the same sort of tricks from a government run out of ideas.
Hey, if you've got a spare couple of million, maybe spare $3 million and sitting on the weekend, the Prime Minister's investment property is going to auction. He's expected to make some $500,000 profit, but he'll also benefit from the very capital gains tax discount that his own Treasurer and government is looking at scrapping. Nick, maybe this is why he's in such a rush to sell the home, do you think?
Well, yeah, it could be one or two things, Peter, as far as I can see. The other thing is he thinks he's going to win the next election and he can carry on living in Kirribilli House. It's the only thing I can think of. But either way, he's delusional. I mean, if they think they're going to scrap the negative gearing and the capital gains concessions, they are in for a terrible time at the next election. But they might just do it. I mean, they're that kind of government. But I will tell you something exclusively, and I don't think this has been reported. There have been major re-landscaping of Kirribilli House that's been going on for at least 5 to 6 months now. It's quite adventurous. I don't think they're in any of the papers. I don't know what that's for. Maybe for his wedding, who knows? But we'll see in due course, I suppose.
Oh, that's an estimates one for you, John O'Donoghue, to find out how much that's all cost and who's approved the plans to re-landscape those extensive gardens. Just quickly, the cost of these protests, it's tens of millions of dollars. We know in Victoria, just for that 1 week around the land force protest, it was $30 million. Chris Minns is saying, we've got to look at this. We've got to look at the question of policing resources before we give these permits. That's a big change. I think that's a good change. But it wasn't so long ago, John O'Donoghue, that when Nigel Farage came to Australia, they put it on him to pay the cost of police to protect him from the protesters. Why aren't we putting the costs on the protesters?
Yeah, well, and we should, frankly. I mean, police resources are there to protect the community. And, you know, when you've got cops diverted into managing these ridiculous people running these protests, rather than chasing thugs and protecting women from domestic violence perpetrators and the like, they should be paying the bill. So I commend Chris Minns for what he's done. I think it's the right thing to work around these ridiculous woke councils that allow this sort of thing to happen. But the resourcing, yes, it should be going to where it needs to, not chasing these people that want to feel good about themselves and they participate in these long-term rallies that will change nothing over the issues they're protesting about. So, yeah, let's send the bill to them. I agree with you.
All right, gentlemen, I have to leave it there. Thank you for your time. Senator O'Donoghue there, Nick Cater.